Dear audience, it's really an honor for me to be invited to your conference in inclusive education in Lithuania. We have heard quite a lot in Sweden of what's going on in your country concerning development of inclusive education, which impresses us a lot. My name is Elisabeth Högberg, and I'm an analyst at the National Agency for Special Needs Education and Schools in Sweden. And I'm also representative board member representing Sweden in the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education. I have been working in Sweden for many years in the education system, and when I started my career as a teacher in the 80s, the concept a school for all was dominant. That meant that the compulsory school was striving for including all students in a very holistic manner, and this is still the case in Sweden. My presentation today will focus on a snapshot of Sweden and our actual challenges at the moment. And I would also like to shortly present my agency that I work in and how we support to organize schools locally. How to think about inclusive education and accountability for a more equitable education is my main topic today. We have developed support for monitoring inclusive education and accountability with all the school organizers in the country, and I will tell you more about this today. Our country, Sweden, is a very long country with a large geographic distances. From the south to the north is about 1,500 kilometers, so finding qualified teachers in a rural area can be really hard. The country is often described as highly decentralized, and we have a lot of challenges due to geographic reasons, but also due to the capacity to meet the needs of students in socioeconomic weak areas. Recently, there are processes of more national governance in order to overcome the disparities that we have due to geographic settings, socioeconomic challenges, and lack of equity and support, and also, of course, of competence in this large country. On the national level, we have the ministry and 5 different agencies for education, and we collaborate a lot. The regional level in Sweden deliver mostly healthcare, transports, but also some schools. But the main focus is the local level, where there are about municipalities and independent schools. We have around 290 municipalities that have the duty to ensure that children have access to equitable and high-quality education, and they are also funding independent schools by taxes. Principals in schools have high degree of autonomy in choosing how to deliver education according to local conditions. They are, however, mandated to continuously monitor and evaluate their work through what we call so-called systematic quality assurance. Our legislation is very clear about the values of inclusion and equity in the Education Act. It says that education must take into account the different needs of children and students and also allocate resources due to the different needs. That they must be given support to develop as far as possible, and that we need to compensate for different needs in education. We often use the word equitable education, which implies that all students need equal access to education, and I think Sweden has succeeded on this matter. Another part of equitable education is that it should be of equal quality wherever in the country it is provided, and this is still a challenge for us. And finally, support should be given to all learners due to their needs to succeed in education, which is a huge challenge. In practice, much remains to be done in Sweden, and a public inquiry in 2021 stated that support for students does not work satisfactory and accommodations are too general and not fitting the needs. Cooperation between teachers and specialist provision is insufficient both in and outside schools. The work with special provision lacks strategic management and leadership, and resource allocation needs to be developed. This was 2021, and I would say that it's still actual areas for development. As I said earlier, schools in Sweden are mostly mainstream compulsory school. Within these schools, there are different ways of how to work with inclusion and supporting the needs of the students. And as you see in the tablet, the compulsory schools are about 90% of all the learners, but we also have some other school forms. Inclusive education are not only about placement, but also about giving the right support to students. And other school forms and options to be placed in is very tailored for special support due to certain disabilities, such as, for example, intellectual disability, deaf or severe language disorder, but they are in quite a small number. And the special needs schools that are nationally is something that we have provided for in our agency. Our agency have different departments and several missions, and we work all over the country, as you may see on the map. We support professionals in schools and principals, and we run 10 small special schools. We also disseminate research and analysis of inclusive education. And we produce support materials and give special needs inquiry and advice and competence development. And we also offer some fundings to schools. So we are located all over the country. But in schools, there are also some support measures. And one important support in schools are the student health and well-being team, which is the potential for inclusion in the local community. These teams is an incentive and are developed as a hybrid organization that is governed on a national level with guidelines, but the school provider is in charge of staffing these teams. The principal organize their work due to the wider structure in the local school and what is the need in the local school. And these teams are a very important support to the local teachers meeting the needs in the classrooms. The incentives for support in classrooms is that students who does not develop academic results in their different subjects, or if they do not feel safe and secure, the support should be addressed for both learning and well-being. The support structure in school is based on a 3-tier system, which starts with the teaching at the bottom to give guidance and stimulation for learning. When taking into account the diversity in classrooms, additional adjustments needs to be given to both individuals and groups in classrooms to meet their needs. And for some small groups, special support shall be given if the other 2 levels does not give results. The term inclusion has many interpretations in the world, and for us in Sweden, the position that the European Agency has developed is central. It is about sharing a vision that all learners of any age are provided with meaningful, high-quality educational opportunity in the local community alongside with friends and peers. We have in Sweden made a clarification of this concept based on human rights and of the position of the European Agency. And I often describe this as baking a cake. You know about baking a cake, that you need ingredients. And what ingredients are needed for a school that want to be more inclusive? The process is important, and of course sharing a vision with all the colleagues locally. We start this cake by looking at diversity, and human diversity is the starting point. We know that our students have diverse needs when we welcome them to schools. And then we have put in place in the central here 6 important areas needs to be looked upon. And equality and gender equality counteract discrimination is a cornerstone. Accessibility means that education needs to remove barriers so that everyone can participate based on their own abilities. All pupils and students must be taught in a language that maximizes knowledge-related and social development. That's why, for example, we need to have a school with sign language, which is important for some students. Education and training must also always be of good quality and acceptable for all, and that the learning promotes both well-being and learning. All students must receive a teaching with adaptations and also receive special support if that's needed due to the student's need. Participation is about giving the opportunity to express their opinion for students in matters that affects them. And finally, organization and placement should be something that is made in a way to access the need of support. Pupils with disabilities must be offered education based on their needs, and a flexible organization is very central. If all these ingredients are in place, we say that this is an equitable education. It's also an inclusive education if you take account into the diversity of the students. In Sweden, we have lacked national goals for education, and the legislation is very extensive. This has led us to confusion on what to focus on when you want to develop an inclusive school. So that's why we have developed a national accountability system with the purpose of improving equity and quality in local education. In baking the cake of inclusive education with the goal of a more equitable education, we have developed many efforts in Sweden. We have the school inspection who look into the school's capacity of following the rules in the Education Act. But the accountability system looks on a broader scale on both the local conditions in the municipality or in the independent school. The system also looks at the processes that needs to be in place in everyday school, and of course the outcomes. What are the results of the school? And the results we look at is academic results, but also language results, secure and safe learning environments, and the well-being of the student. This is the sort of whole-scale presentation of the accountability system. And when we present it, it looks like this. The framework, which we call it, consists of 3 elements mainly. The first one is national objectives for every school form. What can students expect from education in compulsory school or in the adapted school or in the special school? We have 10 different school forms. Together with these objectives, we have created intermediate goals with indicators from national statistics, so schools are provided with their results and a comprehensive system of understanding what to improve in a whole school perspective. One major intermediate goal is, for example, if students get equitable support, with indicators of action plans and surveys to teachers and students and caregivers about how they judge the support system. But looking back on results doesn't always help schools to improve and develop incentives for development. What does an inclusive, equitable school actually look like in more detail is the question we have asked ourselves. That's why we have developed aspirational standards of important processes in everyday school. You may see them in these 7 bubbles in my picture here, my presentation, and they are there to develop a more inclusive, equitable education. In Sweden, we call them success factors for equitable, high-quality school development. And there are 7 processes that we have agreed upon with all the educational agencies, and they are based on both research and practical knowledge. They are presented to schools in a template with examples given what it means to different levels of stakeholders. What does a culture of trust mean to a teacher? And what does it mean to a principal? And what does it mean to the decision maker in the school system? These 7 factors and processes are not goals, but they are aspirational standards that needs to be continuously in place in our schools due to our policy and continuously in improvement. One major mission of our system is to support local decision makers in their monitoring and evaluation of education. So at the moment, our agency and the Swedish Education Agency offers all local school providers a structured dialogue with us as the base for the accountability system and the results of the school. So we use the framework together with the results in a dialogue which is structured together with the decision makers locally. We have 2,800 local school decision makers, and the dialogues contribute to a form of shared understanding of what we mean with an equitable, inclusive education. Through the dialogues, we deliver opportunities to better see a shared whole picture of the school that no single person could perceive alone. This collaborative process helps to synthesize diverse viewpoints, in need for improving inclusive education through equity and quality. The form of the structured dialogue is also used in schools by themselves to help them bring in different levels of stakeholders and listen to their perspectives in the school system, such as teachers, special education teachers, principals, parents, and other stakeholders in the school organization. After deliverance of 1,500 dialogues, and when analyzing the needs for the school organizer, some challenges has been very frequent when working with these schools. And I think that you might recognize some of these challenges that we still face in Sweden, and maybe you face them as well in your country. So I will present 7 main areas to be further developed in Sweden in collaboration with the local stakeholders. The first one is about professional development, how to develop skills and method for teaching and training, and also learning. The next one is compensatory missions. How to meet the needs is a main topic for an inclusive school and needs to be continuously developed. Systematic quality development in schools with a focus on the teaching is something that needs to be working on continuously, because quality is a never-ending story. Learning environment and teaching is, of course, in our focus. How to make classrooms more accessible so that students with disability can participate is very crucial for us. Another area has been clarity of roles and responsibility. In schools, you must ask yourself who is responsible for different actions, and this needs to be cleared out, what the roles are in the school. Organizations and routines is also an area that we have been looking into, and flexible structures in schools are needed in order to support all students. And you need to look at the routines in the schools and how you have conditions for the organization, which includes resources, such as teachers and competence and how to allocate the resources close to the classrooms. And finally, support to teachers and students are very crucial. If we are to develop an inclusive education, teachers need support. And in Sweden, we have a very important incentives for support to teachers, and that's the student health and well-being. Collaboration between teachers and these cross-sectoral professionals is still complicated, and the collaboration needs to be developed in order to develop a more inclusive school. We will continue in Sweden with support to local decision makers on these areas, and maybe, as I said, you recognize some of these challenges in Lithuania as well. Our goal is an inclusive, equitable education for all students and a school for all, which was the incentives in the 80s and still is in our focus. But there are different challenges in 2024 compared to the 80s. So thank you for your attention and very good luck with your work in developing a more inclusive education in your conference and in your further future work. If you have any questions, you will find my email in the presentation. Thank you.